are one of my most favored units. One of the few exceptions would be an all-flying Nether stack. Vampire, good soakers on the apprentice server, but make only mediocre at best on ultimate servers due to charm only affecting primary attacks. These units crumble to heavy secondary attackers such as Chimera and some elementals. These are good for blocking rates though, and can be a good addition to certain flying black strategies. I tend to lean away from these as black for the most part because they don't do well against other common units up top on ultimate servers, and being flying they move up quickly. These are one of 3 paralyzed units with life steal, making them good reinforcements to send to allies if you'd like to passively grow in power as they do attack runs. Demon Knight, avoid these. You will always have a better option for a unit to use, with the only exception being during a rush, and even then you can usually just buy something better. These units are good at blocking holy damage, and that is well about it. Against most other strong attack types they crumble to dust and don't do much damage in return, even to units that are fairly weak against them. I recommend Horn Demons instead. Horn Demon, heavy hitter, a great damage unit for black to use. These work exceptionally well against blue and white, but can be reasonably set up to work against any other color. These are easily the biggest muscle in the Nether army, and are fairly easy to get in quantities. Their major weakness is their one initiative, making them susceptible to slow and flash or web. They are moderately durable as long as you keep them away from the extremely heavy hitters. Against non-blue / non-white, you may wish to try and match these against fatigue / fodder units down in the bottom stacks. Wraith, good flying hitter, and is paralyzed with life steal much like vampires. Their disadvantage is that all their damage is focused into a single 2 initiative primary attack, making the ability charm take down their damage drastically. These are great units to send as reinforcements because a number of top stacks are hurt fairly nicely by these, and they will grow thanks to being paralyzed with life steal. I love these units, and use them whenever I can, although as black, unless you're all flying you will likely have a better choice for a stack. Ghoul, the third and finally paralyzed with life steal unit in Black's arsenal. These are essentially super zombies at the cost of a higher upkeep. These have a higher damage hit, don't have clumsiness, have higher life, and have life steal. Their downside is 1 initiative, and they're undisbandable. I like using these low as soon as I can afford to include them into my stack. They are definitely a good replacement for a low stack of zombies at higher lands. Do not try to put these top stack though, as a soaker is black, you'll likely end up in a population spiral. You can get them through blood ritual or straight summoning. I personally prefer to do blood ritual and dispel it with 1 mana in a few tries. Careful with these when sending them as reinforcements though, because they're melee paralyzed, they can trigger bursting which will usually wipe you your ghouls. The other paralyzed with life steal units do not have this issue because they are magic paralyzed, which doesn't trigger bursting shadow. These are essentially non-paralyzing, ground-based wraiths. Honestly I don't use them that much because they die to many different attack types, but should you be able to set them up against a melee stack they do fairly well. Again, the key use of these is to attack a green using Call Hurricane and Ash of Invisibility and using them to block their treants, while using your other stacks to deal damage. Honestly though, these don't find their way into many of my stacks in any large numbers. Skeleton, disband these when they come from Black Sabbath. They'll cost you battles. Once you get up higher in land you can use them down low as fodder. Zombies are better though, hands down. Zombies can be used as top stack soakers, or as mid/low stack fodder, or disbanded as you get them. They make good soakers against most things, but greens will eat them for breakfast with their huge trees. And many other large hitters will as well. Using these top stack against whites can be used as a distraction if the white is using the standard white fighting stack AA/Uni/KD/Southwest/Titan/ etc. Honestly though, after I get to a certain point in land, I ditch these in favor of heavier, more useful units. Soaker is a use, but I'd rather have a soaker that also dish damage. There are several strategies that revolve around this unit, and I will be using one as an example in the stacking section of this guide. It will be a common zombie top stack. Dark Elf Magician, commonly called Dems, these are one of the top 5 recruitable units in the game. Decent damage with air magic ranged attack mainly thanks to marksmanship. They by far outclass the other magic ranged competitions, elven magicians, druids, and dryads. These make a great addition to many stacks. Some people will just run a few hundred of these for fatigue, others will run 25,000 plus to deal some serious damage. The key is keeping them safe. They are slow to recruit, but well worth the trouble if you have the population space to spare. Orcish Archer/Orc Raider/Wolf Raider, these are essentially the clumsy equivalent of their plain counterparts. Orc Archer greater than Archer, Orc Raider greater than Militia, greater than Wolf Raider greater than Cavalry. They are good for rushing because they can give you a lot of hard-to-kill power, but they won't win many awards for damage dealing or long-term usage. Some people include 1 Orcish Archer to give them another fatigue stack if they don't have 10 stacks already. I will not cast CO only keep Orcish Archers in very low stacks 11th and lower so that just in case I lose a stack, they will fill in the slot with fatigue. Flying, poison, and good for rushing. These aren't much used later from my experience because there are much better flyers. You can use these, just be cautious with them, although in my opinion you're better off just recruiting Dark Elf Magicians. Gargoyle, the other flying black recruitable black is the only one with 2 flying recruitables. These are usually just liabilities. There's ways to make them semi-useful but it's usually just not worth the trouble. If you want a black recruitable flyer you may want to stick to imps. Fun fact, these are one of only 2 golem race units in the game, the other being iron golems. Cave Troll, these are okay for rushing, not godly, but they will do for another poison stack. Personally I tend to avoid them, because I haven't found much use for them in the long run, although they are definitely something you may want to experiment with. Eradication units. Chimera, Heavy damage flyers don't take hits very well though. Good units if you're looking for a flyer, however most blacks aren't, except one who tried an all-flying black. All-flying black is very difficult to pull off. I've never heard of anyone making it very far with one without some extreme blood, sweat, tears, and maybe some pouring. Dwarven Deathseeker / Hellhound, don't bother with these, your units are fragile enough without including additional weaknesses. While I find Hellhounds an interesting unit, they just aren't up to par. The Freebie, good addition to a black scat, the Freebie summon fairly easily and are fairly sturdy units. Used for about the same thing as Lich, great units all around. Most blacks will use Sleeve somewhere in their stacking if they're using ground units. Hydra, these are good for hunting some whites and blues, but personally I prefer Horn Demons. These work well in the black stacking due to their 50% holy resistance, this keeps whites from quite so haywire on them. Lizard Man, good for deferring a little cost of your upkeeps to held, but personally I'd just rather stick with the easier to get zombies or ghouls. Salamander, small fire unit, deals great damage, good in a mid-stack if you keep them fairly protected. Wyvern, included in black all flying, otherwise just ignore these units completely, you have much better choices in ground units. Phantasm units Genie, some blacks use this as a top flying soaker, much like the white uses AA. They're okay units, but they summon too slow in my opinion, although you are welcome to test them, I can't vouch for them being decent units. Minesweeper, great unit, evil hitter, but one big downside, they are the most population intensive unit in the game. I usually don't use these as black, but if I had the population to spare I definitely would consider it deeply. Medusa, great unit for your mid-stacks, purely mana upkeep helps take some of the load off your population as well, I almost always use these as a black when I'm deep stacked. Siren, don't bother with them much as black, they have specialized uses, but usually you won't encounter these situations. Psychic Wisp, good ranged fatigue / fodder unit, a little fatter than your other options but a summon of these isn't unwelcome in a black army. I usually avoid them though. Sylph / Sprite, Sylphs are basically big sprites, sprites are smaller and higher initiative, do less damage and can't take less, Sylphs are bigger but lower initiative, although they can take more damage and deal more out. Descendant units Soul Speaker, small ranged fodder fatigue, I prefer Dryads for black, but these can be used as an additional small ranged stack. Don't let them drift up too high or they'll cost you. Pegasus, white flying unit, eats gold something black has plenty of consider it if you are using heavy flying, summons well for black. Knight, gotten from Horn of Valhalla, can be fun as black, but I don't usually use them much because you have good choices elsewhere. Astral Magician, don't bother with black, trust me, they're not worth the effort. Angel, again, not worth the effort, but they are summonable, albeit mind-numbingly slow for their lack of usefulness. Archangel / Spirit Warrior / Unicorn, can be fun to mess around with for fun, but they won't do much for you, and are rather inefficient to gather in any real numbers because the only viable option is the market, and they're expensive there, you'd be better off buying a few candles or ashes. Verdant units Dryad / Nymph, ranged fodder / fatigue units, these both work well with black, and personally I use Dryads a lot. Nymphs are a little harder to summon so I only occasionally use them. Griffin, same situation as Archangel / Spirit Warrior / Unicorn, these simply aren't worth the trouble and aren't even as fun to play with as black, as the white complex are Treant / Mandrake / Creeping Vines, as I mentioned in my other guides, don't bother with these unless you're green, plant growth doesn't help you. Much off color. Whirlbear, fun to mess with foul water, but truthfully not worth the trouble to summon as black. Keep with stuff in black and blue for the most part. Gorilla, gotten from Peaches, good unit, but expensive to keep health-wise, I usually only use them during Armageddon. Plain units Militia / Pikemen / Phalanx, these are basic recruitables, I don't bother using them for anything more than fake stacks / numbers while rushing. Cavalry, I like these as black rushing, much like blue, but later on in the rush I usually drop the cavalry and only keep the Dark Elf Magicians, and maybe some archers. Orcs are also quicker to recruit than these if you're desperate for numbers. Archer, I don't use these much as black, except as low fatigue, as I mentioned in the other guides, these are nice to recruit to per turn if you aren't recruiting anything else. If you are recruiting other stuff just keep a turn of recruiting these at the 10th stack or lower, usually lower for me. Renegade Wizard, great viable unit, expensive to upkeep. They are a little weaker than Dark Elf Magicians, but are still a good addition if you can afford them. Personally I don't buy them often as black. Falcon / Mercenary / Assassin / Bounty Hunter, all 4 decent sword units, not as good as Renegade Wizards, but will work for you. Assassins in Paracular are good at hunting minekeepers. Flakons are good for all flying stacks. Mercenaries are good for rushing. Bounty Hunters are good for hiding down low. Warhound / Trained Elephant / Starving Peasant, don't bother with these 3 unless you need fake power, they don't do much in general, especially when you take into account the cost of keeping them. They can all be used with foul water, but I usually don't bother. Fanatic / Werewolf, rare to come by, but good units nonetheless. With Fanatics just keep them around when you get them,